Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. We've recently launched our Patreon page, which can be found at cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon. If you aren't familiar with Patreon, it's an easy way for those who are interested in this show to help out by simply pledging a small amount each month in sponsorship. Now that could be as little as $5 a month, which is about £3.80, or as much as you like. You will enable us to dedicate more time creating more content to help you, including videos, more blog posts, and even more shows. So if you can, head over to cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon and get involved. Before we start today's show, I'd like to give a huge shout out and a thank you to my first two patrons on Patreon. Jose Negro, some of you might know him as Porkapek, his online name, and Sung Kim, who you also may know as Dance to Die. So thank you both for your generous support. Now they've both pledged $5 a month towards the running costs of the podcast and everything else that I do at Cynical Developer. So it pays for kits and web hosting and hosting the actual podcast and all that sort of stuff. If you want to become a patron of the show, then head over to cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon. Anyway, enough of that and on with the show. So in this episode, we talk to Daniel Furze about the barrier to entry for front-end developers. Daniel is a front-end developer with a variety of experience from working in small software companies to some of the biggest digital agencies in the UK. He now works consulting with agencies and in-house teams on large websites and web applications, training developers on front-end best practices and improving workflow and communication between teams. So welcome to the Cynical Developer, Dan.
Hi, James. Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's good for you to come on, and I think it's a big topic that we've got to talk about today.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something that I hear all the time, and people ask me about in various places that I go and work in. What's the barrier to entry? What should I learn? What's the next big thing? And hopefully, I'll shed a bit of light on that and tell you what I think about it.
Yeah, I was actually talking about this very topic a few days ago with a colleague of mine, and he's not been a developer for very long, so he wasn't ever aware, and he's never really experienced the world before all these JavaScript frameworks.
Okay.
Back when I started as a developer, as a web developer, JavaScript was there for validation. So that's all you really needed. You know, it was very, very low barrier to entry. You had to have a good grasp or a reasonable grasp of HTML, because even then, HTML was quite forgiving because you were developing stuff for the likes of IE, and IE always looked at your markup and went, I think I know what you're trying to do, so I'm going to try and display it in the way that you need it. And then,
yeah, exactly. And then it got all advanced and crazy in the last few years.
Yeah, it sort of stepped up its game, and you had jQuery, and that made us have more than validation. You could style things a lot easier, and you were starting to do fancy animations. That became easier
interactions. To do. Yeah, definitely.
But then over the last sort of 7 or 8 years, it's just motored.
It's absolutely boomed, hasn't it? Everything's changed.
Yeah, I think when you first look at development, or when you first looked at programming back when I started, it was always a case of, well, do I do C, C++, do I look at Java? It was VB6 back when I first looked at it.
Oh, wow.
And then the likes of C# and VB.NET and that came along. And that was quite hard. Which language do you go for? And then even with the web, you had PHP and you had classic ASP, and there was a couple of different choices, but always for a lot of the front-end stuff, it was JavaScript and HTML, and that's really all you needed. Yeah,
that's the thing. I remember those days as well. I'm not sure if I've been doing it as long as yourself, but when I first started as well, it was just HTML, CSS, a little bit of JavaScript. And there's always these things in the back as well, like the PHP and the ASP, and I did bits of that when I started as well. And for me, I didn't really know what else there was out there. I just sort of saw these things and started learning them because that's how you did it those days. But now there's just so much choice. There's so many different languages that compile to other languages, and frameworks and libraries that you can use. And sometimes you might not know which is the best one to use.
Yeah. Even sitting down to not use a framework as such and use vanilla JavaScript. Yeah, there's like 5 or 6 different ways that you can approach just writing straight JavaScript now, because it can be transpiled back into proper JavaScript, you're using the likes of TypeScript and stuff. So even that's a little bit confusing, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that kind of thing's come on really well in the last couple of years, and I'm a big fan of TypeScript, actually. I really like it, and I like how it sort of makes JavaScript a little more like a programming language,
sure,
if you want. And so I do like those kind of things. But yeah, you're right. If I was just coming into the industry now as a junior developer, I would not know where to start. I mean, it was easy for me when I did start because there wasn't really much to do. There was just, like I say, the HTML, the basic CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript when I was making my first website. But yeah, I just kind of dug into it and viewed source like everyone did when they were learning, and just kind of learned from that. But now you can't view source now because a lot of the apps are JS MVC apps, which don't show you the source. Even if you do look at it, you're not going to code like that. You're not going to code the HTML that you actually see in the end product on the web, because it's probably been transpiled and compiled from a million different languages and templates before you even see it. So it is getting harder and harder to learn in the way that I learned when I was sort of younger.
Yeah, definitely. I do remember doing the view source and hacking bits of JavaScript out of other people's websites and sticking it onto mine. But even before that, I came an even dirtier route, and it's even worse than front page. My first website was made in Word.
Okay, yeah, I remember those days too. I didn't actually do it like that. I think I did use Dreamweaver when I was first starting out, and that made it a little bit easier. But I just remember my first website was for my band when I was 14, and that was just done in Notepad, I think. There's so many tools out there now as well. It's even down to the matter of what IDE do you use, or what sort of development environment do you set up before you can get coding. It's not just Notepad anymore. There's a multitude of different editors you can use.
Yeah, and I've been a little bit taken away from that. I've not been as exposed to it as maybe I should have been, because being a .NET dev, my world and my day revolves around Visual Studio, and even that's starting to change now, because we've got Visual Studio, the full shebang on Windows. You've got Visual Studio Code, and that's on Linux, it's on Windows, it's on Mac. And now they've recently picked up the Xamarin Studio, made that Visual Studio for Mac.
Okay, so, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, we've got a few different things there, and I know the likes of JetBrains have just bought out Rider, which you can write .NET in, and you can do your web stuff in, and there's all sorts out there now for editing. It's like you say, which one do you go with, and what do you do?
Well, that's it. Like I'm using Visual Studio Code all the time now, because I feel like it's kind of got the best of both worlds. Like you say, you can do your .NET in it, and you can do your front end, you can do whatever you want in it, and it's just a really good editor. I use a Mac, so I'm really glad that it came to be able to be used on Mac. That's really, really good. I use Atom as well, which is pretty good. So I use Atom for just smaller projects, but VS Code, when I'm working on a big application and I need to have a few different things open at the same time, a few different languages and things open at the same time, switch between them. It's a really useful tool.
Yeah, I've not really been in the Mac space. I owned a Mac Mini for about maybe 3 months several years ago, when I had to do some Objective-C work.
Okay.
And then when I stopped doing that, I sold it. But recently I picked up one of the new MacBook Airs. So that's boot camped with Windows, and I am primarily using Windows on it. But one of my targets is to actually flip over to Mac OS X on there, and give it a go with writing stuff on Visual Studio Code on the Mac, and also using the Visual Studio for Mac, and seeing what that's like. And hopefully I'm going to try and do some live streaming with that. So we're going to go balls to the wall, for want of a better word. And I'm not going to actually open it until I do the live stream, I don't think, and just see where we go.
Well, that could be interesting. Yeah, I definitely recommend it. I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah, so that's just getting me some more experience with different ideas, and I've been doing this for a long time now. But when, as we said at the very beginning, when you first come into this industry now, even just as a web developer or a web designer, where do you start? Where would you tell people to start looking?
Well, just to touch on something you said there, if someone comes in as a web developer or web designer, I mean, I don't even know what that is anymore because there's such a multitude of jobs and job titles out there as well. Web developer I'll say that again. A web developer could be a front-end developer, what I consider to be a front-end developer, or it could be full stack, or it could just be a back-end developer and a designer. A lot of the time people want designers to know some code now. And are you a UXer? I mean, the job titles have all changed in the last few years as well. And now you've got all sorts of levels of skills and abilities, people coming in at different jobs and things like that. But
yeah. I used to get very offended when people used to trying to understand what I did as a job, and they'd say, "Oh, you're a web designer then? You design websites?" And I'm like, no, I'm a web developer. I do the programming side of it. But as you say now, even as a graphic designer who designs websites, so a web designer, you need to know a lot of the JavaScript stuff. I started life as a graphic designer. My brother is still a graphic designer, and he does a lot of web stuff, and he's being pushed now more and more to learn some of these JavaScript frameworks and that to build with the websites and help with the e-commerce team in the business that he works in.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy these days how much you have to know, even if it's not necessarily your role. I mean, I'm in a niche as a front-end developer, but when I first started out, I don't even think front-end development existed.
Yeah.
I was just a web developer. I started out after uni, after doing an IT degree with a little smattering of web development in it. I decided I liked that and then became an assistant web developer at a finance company and kind of got thrown in at the deep end. I had to learn what web development was, and then sort of realized that there was this thing called front-end development, which I specialized in and went on to be a developer for a few agencies and software companies focusing on that. But that has changed because now if you go for a job as a front-end developer, if you look at the spec, they'll want you to know a bit of design, a bit of UX, a bit about servers and database sort of layer of it as well, which is all fine. And I like learning new things and I like learning things like that. But I do try to stick to my niche as a front-end developer and help people sort of progress and train on that.
Yeah, definitely get that because I consider myself to be a full-stack developer. I can do the database side of it. I can do the business layer. I can do the front end stuff. I can work with the frameworks on the front end, and I understand a little bit about the hardware side of it as well. So sort of that to me would be full stack. But as you say, there are so many job titles out there now, and they all seem to be revolving around the same sort of thing. Everybody's being pushed together, and I think more of the fact now that JavaScript is being used for more than just that validation and the animation and stuff like that. You can actually write server programs and back end stuff with JavaScript. Some people hate that fact. Some people embrace that fact. I'm neither here nor there on it, but because it's just not something that I need to do day to day.
Well, I see a lot of people embracing it, actually. A lot of friends I have that are back-end developers are primarily working in Node now, and that's JavaScript. It just kind of exploded a few years back, maybe 4 or 5 years, when Node started getting really popular and running on the server. You can now use it to build server-side applications, and you can now sort of apply programming paradigms to this Node that's actually written in JavaScript. So, yeah, I'm definitely agreeing with you there. A lot of people are changing their skills, not necessarily changing their roles as a developer, say a back-end developer, but changing their skills and upskilling in things like JavaScript. But it's still a million miles away from what I consider classic front-end JavaScript to be. So it's a bit of a minefield at the moment for people starting out.
Yeah, definitely, because we touched on it earlier. It's not just a case now of just knowing vanilla JavaScript. It's about knowing these frameworks, but it's a double-edged sword as well, because I don't think I would hire somebody if they came to me and they said, I'm a React developer.
Oh yeah.
And I said, can you write in normal JavaScript? Could you go and do a similar thing with just JavaScript? And I think that's something that people need to understand, is that you need to be able to do both.
That's true, yeah. I see it quite a lot when I'm interviewing people and helping companies with the hiring process. They need someone who has X skill, and that skill might be React or Angular, but next year it might be something totally different. So you've got to have these core skills in JavaScript before you even say that you're a React developer. I see loads of job specs at the moment that want Vue developers, and I'm just thinking, is Vue developer really a thing? I'd just say that's a JavaScript developer.
Yeah.
If you don't know core JavaScript and you're just copying and pasting Vue tutorials, you can't really call yourself a JavaScript developer. And I don't think you really necessarily have those skills.
No, it's that is very true. But it seems like every 5 minutes now there's a new framework that comes out. You know, where in your opinion, as a front end specialist, is this going to end? Because we keep seeing these new frameworks coming out, and then we get into bed with a framework like Angular, and then they go and do us the justice of going, do you know what? The next version, it's completely different.
Totally
you have
different.
to rebuild everything. You know, do you think there's going to be a point where it becomes more like the fact, like C# and Java, where this is how you write your JavaScript for a given framework, and it's always going to be that way? Or is it just one of those beasts you think that's going to just keep evolving?
I mean, I think it is going to keep evolving. I don't think there's really this framework race, and I don't think anyone's going to win out over the other, because at the end of the day, they are just programming concepts and patterns written in JavaScript. I do sort of keep fairly framework agnostic with what I do. I can do Angular, I can do React, but I can just sort of lend my hand to any of those things. And I like dabbling on all the latest things, but I try not to pigeonhole myself into sort of being an Angular developer or anything like that.
Right.
I do think that those two are the biggest ones, Angular and React, because they're sort of backed by the biggest companies, Google and Facebook.
Yeah.
And they're becoming really, really popular. But they have got that caveat, like you mentioned before. If you buy into one of these frameworks really heavily, it could all just change and be pulled from underneath you.
Yeah.
That did happen, didn't it? Like you mentioned with Angular, between version 1 and 2, it was a total rewrite. And now you get people who say they are an Angular 1 developer or an Angular 2 developer, or even an Angular 4 developer, or whatever that is.
Yeah, and now they've dropped the numbers, and it's just Angular JS now, isn't it? They don't like to use any version number. So,
but I think there is that distinction there, because I've gone for a role and needed to do Angular 1 and Angular 2, and I've not really done much Angular 1 for years. So I'm saying I can do it, but it's a totally different beast if you're trying to build a new app in Angular 2. And if you want someone to support a legacy app in Angular 1, it is totally different now. So you're sort of at the mercy of Google and the other developers who do these frameworks. You're sort of at their mercy with if they want to change it or not, with it being open source.
Yeah, and I think the way that these frameworks bake their way into your projects as well, I think once you get into bed with one of them, that's it. Because where I work day to day, we use Knockout.js. And when I've mentioned this to other people, they said, "You use what? Isn't that an old one?" I'm like, "Yeah, but it does the job. It does the job, and it does what we need it to do. It doesn't do too much."
Yes, that's always a risk, getting really involved with one. But I guess if it's in your project, you're not going to change it, are you? And if that becomes a legacy project because of the software you chose at the time, then that's fine. You just have to keep maintaining that, don't you? But you get people these days who just want to learn the next big thing and do the next big thing for all of the projects.
Yeah.
So I'm working on React projects at the moment, but there's talk of Preact, and I've never really worked with Preact, but that's another new thing. And everyone now wants to move all their React projects to Preact. And I'm thinking, is it really worth the technical debt you're introducing to make that change just because you want to know the latest framework?
Yeah.
You don't want your team rewriting code bases just because a new popular one's come out and people want to jump ship.
Yeah. And I have found myself sort of looking online at all these new things that are coming out, going, right, which one shall I have a look at? What shall I have a play around with and maybe try and build something with? But it's changing that fast. Why bother to go out and do all these extra bits if I'm not using it day to day? I think is a good point.
So yeah, a lot of what I talk to people about is I try and get them to focus on more core skills than just frameworks, like I mentioned before. So just focusing on really core JavaScript skills, because if you do that, you can lend your hand to any of these frameworks and any of the ones that come out in the next year or two or whenever. If you've got that core knowledge and you know your JavaScript patterns and you know what things are doing behind the scenes of these frameworks, you can work with any of them really. I try not to tell people that I am a certain framework developer. I just say I'm a JavaScript developer or a front end one. So yeah, I've had people ask me, "Oh, are you a React developer?" And I say, "Well, no, I'm just a developer."
Yeah.
So yeah, you don't want people jumping ship and doing that in a commercial environment and changing what they want to learn all the time. It's a big risk. Another thing just to touch on is the whole issue with React licensing that's just happened recently. If you get tied down to a framework like React, I don't know if you've read much about it recently, but they were going to change the licensing, and a lot of people like had a massive fuss about that, and there was a big uproar about changing it. And now they've gone back on that decision, but it might have made all the code that you wrote in React like not available to use. And now you're sort of you're in bed with that framework. Facebook were going to change the licensing and some of the clauses to do with patents. And a lot of people were just up in arms about that, thinking, "Oh, we've used this open source software, but now it might not be quite open source, so we can't carry on using it." And a lot of people dropped React and started moving to something else. And you're kind of going to be at that risk when it's an open source project.
Yeah. It's one of them. How do you enforce that, especially with something like JavaScript, where it's not compiled and it's just there, so anybody could come along and take that and sort of start building their own thing. But yeah, it's changing the licensing on anything when it's so embedded into an industry or a culture is a very risky move.
It is. It was a very sort of tense couple of weeks, and Twitter went mad about it. But I think it's all been solved now.
Yeah. So we've sort of said that if you're new to development, that you need to focus on your core JavaScript skills or your vanilla JavaScript skills. But you're going to need, I think, to at least have some grasp of the frameworks that are out there. Would you suggest that it is just Angular and React that you should maybe go and have a look at, or is there something else that you would suggest that people go and have a look at, maybe an up-and-coming framework?
Well, with regards to that, I probably wouldn't try and recommend a specific framework. I wouldn't want to be the person who tells everyone to learn Angular and then it becomes, obsolete. But I would definitely, I keep saying, I want people to focus on their core skills, because then they can learn all these concepts for Angular and React. And if they sort of have the knowledge, say if they know really deeply what the MVC pattern is and how things work together, they can just do that without a framework, and then they can build in any framework they want. I mean, yeah, like I said before, Angular and React are the biggest ones at the moment. And I know a lot of people are learning Vue because it's really lightweight and it's faster than React and things like that. I wouldn't necessarily go for what's just in vogue at the moment, though. I definitely wouldn't recommend it, to be honest. As you touched on before, you should probably choose something that you're going to be using in your day job every day, something that's really robust and something that you're going to really dig into. So like I'm using React loads at the moment in my day job, so I'm focusing very much on that, but I'm not pigeonholing myself, and I'm not going to not learn other things.
Yeah. So we're very much focusing on JavaScript frameworks and that, but there are other technologies as well. Even CSS is not just CSS anymore.
Well, that's it. When people, so a lot of people come to me who are just getting into coding. I used to help out at a mentoring session called Code Up in Manchester, which teaches people to code for free. And it's people with no skills in programming at all who maybe want to change career into programming or just learn something new. And a lot of people think, oh, it's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I'll do these tutorials online. But then when they come to build a real project with like a real company, maybe there's this whole process in place. So CSS, like you said, isn't CSS anymore. You've got Sass, SCSS, Less, Post CSS, all these technologies on top of CSS, which do actually just output CSS at the end of it. But it's sort of this, there is a barrier to entry there to actually get some code to a browser now. Yeah. Not just with CSS, but with HTML, you've got myriad of templating languages available. There's like Jade and Jekyll and things like Underscore, which is like a JavaScript library, but it helps you pipe out HTML. And you've got things like Mustache and Handlebars, which are templating languages. And all that does just render out HTML at the end, but it makes your workflow a little bit difficult to start. And if you don't know the languages and the syntax, it makes it a little bit harder to get into at first. But all they are languages and syntaxes that extend HTML. So if you've not got those core HTML concepts in your brain, you're not really going to still be able to do it very well, are you?
Yeah.
Same with CSS.
Yeah, I think some of the things like Less and Sass, they're added on to try and make CSS less of a pain in the backside to work with. Because once you've got a big application, you want to go and change a set color through your theme or something like that.
now need variables.
Yeah, you've got to go and find it everywhere. You've got to change it, and you can't just do a find and replace because it might replace it in places that you don't want it to be replaced in. But now you get variables and things like that through the likes of Less and SAS, and it's great. That's really good. But I can't help but feel that a lot of these frameworks that we're bringing in, are making it complex for complexity's sake a lot of the time, and they do make it, as we're saying, a lot harder for people to get involved and actually get stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true to a point. They do help, I think. Preprocessors like Less and SAS, they do allow for like better reusability of code and splitting your files and making them more manageable, giving you things like variables and functions, which CSS doesn't have really. Well, you kind of get into the point where it does have, but these things were put on top of CSS to make it easier for people in the long run and to maybe work on a bigger scale project and with a bigger team. But it is a bit of a barrier to someone coming in as a junior and not knowing about these things, or even coming from a different discipline, like a back-end developer who doesn't really know much CSS. They've now got to learn how to compile SAS and run a gulp file or a grunt file and do all these kind of extra things. All they want to do is change a color. So yeah, they are good tools in their own right, and there's a big ecosystem built up around them, especially post CSS at the moment, and they are really, really useful. But for someone coming in, they're looking at it, and it's totally different from when I looked at CSS. Like we were saying about viewing source and just stealing people's CSS. You could do that back in the day, but now you can't because you don't know how it was built and what pipeline it went through to get to what it is at the moment.
Yeah. So you're missing out on a big part of the development process. It sort of builds on the argument that I had with people quite a few years ago now. Is they'd come to me and they say, "Oh, I can build a website," and I said, "Oh, right, okay. Well, what do you use?" And they say, "Well, I use Dreamweaver," and I'm like, "Right. So which part of Dreamweaver do you use?" And then they go, "Oh, the bit that's like Word where you can drag and drop stuff on," and I'm like, "Right. Well, that's not really telling you what you're building." And also, when you start adding your styles in, it just created a monster of a CSS file. And as soon as you undid a few changes to your style, it didn't remove it from the file. It just removed it from that element and left it in your file. So you ended up with CSS files that were megs and megs in size.
That's crazy.
Back when we were doing, we just had dial-up. And I'd say, no, you need to get in there and you need to actually look at the markup side of it. And I said, it becomes very much like that scene in The Matrix where the guy is just watching the numbers fall down the screen, I think he says to Neo something along the lines of, "I don't see the numbers and the letters anymore. I just see the woman in the red dress." To paraphrase it really, and that's what it is. I think you need to have that understanding that those div tags and the p tags and what they're actually going to do on the screen, because I don't use a WYSIWYG editor. Visual Studio just shows you the code, and I just sort of write my bits in there, and then you get up in the browser and you go, "Oh, look, it looks the way I expected it to."
Yeah, well, you do need that knowledge, and if people sort of use if they use frameworks and HTML templated languages, sometimes they might not know actually what's going to be piped out at the end, and it might not be the correct markup. With some of these frameworks, you don't really know what you're actually going to get as the end result. So if you don't know what you're doing with semantic markup and the right tags and marking up the document, that's what HTML was for originally, marking up a document. But now it's just extended into so much at the moment. It's just gone crazy. Yeah. And the same thing with CSS. It was just meant for styling, but now you can do functions in it and all these kind of crazy things, which are good. But at the end of the day, you need to know what CSS is doing behind the scenes, or else you won't really be a front-end developer if you're just copying and pasting and using these build tools that you don't know about. With that and JavaScript as well, same thing. Yeah,
it is becoming quite hard. So we've touched on the fact that you should go and look at your core JavaScript skills. What other tips would you give to people that were just getting into the industry? So it could be our listeners, or it could be people that our listeners know, that they come to our listeners and say, "You're a programmer. How do I start?" What would be your advice to them?
So my best advice I'd give to people is try some of these online tutorials that you can get, because there's a wealth of knowledge out there at the moment, and a lot of them are free, and a lot of free tutorials or paid subscriptions to things like Pluralsight or Udemy. They're really good. And you don't let it put you off that you're paying for these tutorials, because they're well worth the money. I would definitely go online and try and get some of the better quality tutorials and just start building a little project, even if it's a side project, just to learn some tech that you're not necessarily exposed to every day. just build something like that and just learn off the people around you, because everyone sort of learned once. I was a beginner once as well, and I love helping beginners learn to code. Just ask questions really, and just ask me how I do things.
Yeah.
And things like that, like learning sessions like Code Up that I mentioned before, that's a brilliant place to go and get started. It's like I was involved with it for a while, and it was really good mentoring people and like, seeing people progress and learn things really quickly. It's really good. Just surround yourself with people like that.
Yeah, it's some good solid advice there. And we mentioned Pluralsight. If you want to go and have a look at that, it's if you head to cynicaldeveloper.com/Pluralsight, you'll be able to get to there, and we'll link to a lot of the things there that Dan spoke about in the show notes. So don't grab that pen and try and scribble it down while you're driving or running in the gym or whatever you're doing. It's getting good quality online courses is good. And so setting out and look at your core vanilla JavaScript, look at CSS, learn the HTML, and actually write it in Notepad if you want. I think you could actually pick up basic HTML and CSS in an evening or two. You could do stuff, and you could definitely have a nice looking website out there pretty quick, I think.
Well, I recommend those platforms definitely. When I started working in an agency in Manchester, I had a Pluralsight subscription, and I just lapped up all the courses that I could on it because there was so much on there, and it went from really basic things to really advanced things that I didn't know anything about at the time. And I just tried to learn as much as I could when I was just starting out, and just like spent the time doing it, and actually got involved and did the coding rather than just watch videos and read articles. Just actually made a little web app to help me hone those core skills and keep them up to date as well.
Yeah, I've brought up a lot of junior developers through my career as well, and I always set them a task when they first come to me and they say, how do I get better at doing this? How do I learn how to do something or other? And I always set them a project of an MP3 download website to go and build at home, because it's not necessarily all the things that a front-end developer would need, because I normally deal with full-stack developers, but it had your database in there, it had your back-end business logic, it had your front-end logic, it had the front-end UI, it may have APIs in there, it had users, it had monetary transactions to buy stuff. I tell them that maybe put swag on there so they can buy a t-shirt or a mug or something with your company logo on. So you've got digital downloads and you've got real downloads, and trying to pull in all those different aspects into a single project that it might take them a little while to build, but they're building these projects that would actually do different things, and it would do everything that they're probably going to come up against in their day-to-day jobs as a developer.
And that's really good as well, because they might actually expose them to a different area of development that they enjoy and didn't know about. So if they're doing the whole project from start to finish, if I was doing it, I might find the database side of it really interesting, and I'd never thought to do that before. So that's a really good all-round project to do. Something like that.
Yeah, a lot of people find it quite daunting because it is a whole project, and if you're really unsure and you don't want to take that leap of faith, then just making little projects. And I think, like I've said on the show before, is that getting those projects online where people can see them. No matter what you build, there is always going to be somebody that is 5, 10, 15 paces behind you trying to learn the same things. So,
they can learn from you as well. If you open source it.
Exactly.
Get into open source work. That's another good bit of advice. When I was sort of starting out, I just found plugins that I found useful, added to them and amended them and with functionality that I needed. And then that got me into the open source community a little bit. And it actually got me a job once as well, helping out with an open source plugin that an agency had written. I just added to it and fixed a bug, and then ended up going for an interview and got a job there, which was really good.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
So getting involved in that stuff's all really good for your skills and really good for your communication and working with other people as well.
Yeah. Now I've got code on GitHub, and that's the one that I push more than a lot of the others. It's the main popular one, but there are other ones out there, Bitbucket, and to name another one that you can do. And you could even just host your own code on your own website if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
But getting something out there, especially as a newbie into the industry, when you do go for those interviews, you're going to be showing that you can actually do something. It's not a case of you just sitting there saying, "Oh yeah, I can do JavaScript, I can do CSS."
I definitely know it.
Yeah, I do. I've done it. Honest. You go, yeah, I've done it, and I've written this project. It's only a simple website, but it's out there. Here's my website that I wrote in React, and here's a little project that's on GitHub that I did in Angular, and here's something that I wrote completely in Notepad with no IntelliSense, no help, nothing like that, and it does X, Y, and Z function. It does something. It doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It just has to prove the fact that you know something.
Yeah, exactly. And some of these courses that I see, they sort of promote you doing that and open sourcing some of your work to help you get a job. There's a company called North Coders who run out of Manchester, and they train people up over, I think it's 6 months or so, to go from zero to having all these skills. And they do a lot of open source projects, and they encourage their candidates to have those projects online for people to see, and they end up getting really good jobs out of it because they've got the evidence that they've learned these skills and they've sort of gone into the core knowledge of JavaScript and things like that, and they've got the proof.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Yeah, and I think the point to take out of that there is that being able to prove that you can do it is a lot easier now.
Yeah, you can just practice, and you can have your own little projects, and you can host them really easily. You can get into it, and you can just have like a different variety of projects there as well.
Yeah, because I've interviewed a lot of different people for different levels of jobs over the years, and it still amazes me the amount of people that come into an interview with me that don't have any web presence at all. They have nothing online. They've got no open source stuff. Having something like a blog and that is a lot of work. It's a lot of dedication. But having something like GitHub where you just throw some code up that you wrote just as a proof, people might not even look at it, but it's there for potential employers to look at it. And people overlook that fact that they should be having that, and it helps them get over that hurdle of actually getting into the interview.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as long as people have the confidence to push their code out there and promote it a little bit, and not be scared if people are going to criticize it, because that's the only way you're going to get better as well. Having open source code out there, people will just suggest better ways of doing things, and you'll learn from that as well.
Yeah, and if you do push your code out live and somebody does criticize it, one of my friends gave me some of the best advice, and it worked, because I pushed one of my projects out and I put it onto to Reddit, the cesspool of the internet. And one troll came along, and he didn't like the way that I'd written the attribute side of it. It's I've spoken about it many times. It's a micro ORM project, and to define primary keys and lengths of strings and stuff for your database, you would decorate the properties with attributes, and he hated that, and he just slated it. And I'd already planned to build a Fluent API to make it a lot easier so that the ORM that I was using wasn't leaking into the actual data models and things. And the best thing that I did to him was go and thank him for his feedback, tell him I would take on board what he was saying, and that I will change it. And then when I did change it and built the Fluent API, I went back to that post and said, "Oh, I've done it. Let's, what do you think?" And there was nothing. Kill the trolls with kindness.
Some good advice, yeah, generally.
We've all probably seen those memes of the guy staring at his screen and his computer screen, and the wife looking at him really angry. And he's saying, "I can't come to bed yet. Somebody's wrong on the internet."
Yeah.
I've been there being angry with people online, and you think, why? So just kill them with kindness and just carry on with what you're doing. Because if you're pushing stuff out there, it's more than what they're doing. They're sitting on there writing stupid comments on people's code. You're actually out there doing something and making something of your life.
Exactly. Just get something out there. That's a really good bit of advice for someone starting out.
Yeah, great. So we're just about out of time for this evening. I've really enjoyed actually talking about the front end side of stuff. It's not something I get to talk about too often.
Good, me too.
Obviously, we have people coming on and talking about JavaScript frameworks, but talking about it as a whole industry is something really good. So it's been nice for a change. So thanks for coming on and talking to us.
No problem.
And thank you to all you guys and girls out there for listening to Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Daniel Furze talking about the barrier to entry for front-end developers. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website, where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.